Welcome back to PHP for Beginners. In this lesson, I will be discussing making decisions in your program. I hope you have already listened to the first two tutorials. The first one discusses installing easy PHP and running simple scripts. The second one talks about variables, data types, and assignments. The objective of this lesson is to learn about the if-else statement, the switch case statement, briefly about getting input from the user, and PHP tags and the coding style. The if statement. Before I talk about the if statement, I want to make a comment about my teaching style. I like to teach by example. We are going to talk about programming constructs, and you need to follow the grammar, the syntax exactly. However, I did not learn English or PHP programming by learning grammar first, so I will attempt to teach programming by examples. You probably should refer to the recommended text for this class to learn finer syntax rules. Let's come back to the if statement. If you want to selectively execute part of a program, one way to do that is to use the if statement. The if statement executes a block of code only if the specified expression is true. If the value is false, then the if block is skipped and execution continues with the rest of the program. You can either have a single statement or a block of code within an if statement. The conditional expression must always be a Boolean type. It must evaluate to either true or false. In PHP, 0 would be considered false. These are two distinct if statements. However, since one and only one can be true, we can write it using the else clause. Also, what happens if A and B both were the same? How would these two statements behave? Here is another example using an else clause, little more efficient. What you are asking is that if A is greater than B, then you are going to print this statement. Otherwise, for all other conditions, you are going to print this statement. So there is an if followed by an and else. Here is a better style. I like to put the statements that follow if within braces, where you can have one or more statements. It says that if this is true, this block of code is going to be executed, else this block of code is going to be executed. I like this style better than the previous one. You can also have an else if statement. So here the first question we are asking is A greater than B? Then it's going to print this. If that's not true, the next question we are asking is, are A and B the same? Are they equal? Then we are going to print this statement. Otherwise, which is of course B is greater than A, then you're going to print this statement. So you have an if, else if, else. Following if, you can have 0 or more else ifs and then 0 or 1 else at the end. Remember, we saw the relational operators earlier. Very often you use these relational operators in if statements, as we saw earlier in the previous slide. The PHP tags. As you already learned that if you want to write any PHP code, it must go inside PHP tags. There are three kinds of PHP tags. One that start with the question mark PHP and end with the question mark. This is the default PHP tag. This is one that you would see being used most often. You also have a shorter version of it. I would recommend avoid using this one, mainly because it may not always be supported. The third one, a more formal one, is the script tag. Here you're saying that you are creating a script and the language that you are using is PHP. The script tag is available with many different languages. the code template. In the following lessons, I may be showing you several lines of code, and often I would omit the begin PHP and PHP statements. But when you want to take that code and make it work, make sure that if it is PHP code, it must go within those tags. Then reading inputs. This looks a little busy. Most of this one is actually an HTML form, and I want to make a little more interesting program where I can get some inputs from the user, and that can typically be done by creating what is called an HTML form. I won't get into those details, but in this case, once we get the values from the user, and when the user clicks on the submit button, we go through this PHP script where we are going to pick up the name and the age, and we will echo that back to the user. If you take this program, save it to a file like reading inputs.php, run it within your browser, as we have talked about it before, this is what you would get. You will see two text boxes for allowing you to enter name and age, put in some information, and click on the submit button. It'll print this information. Of course, using the submit button, you can send that information to a database or carry out some other action using that. Here is another example. Again, there is an HTML form, and here is the PHP code that we had seen earlier, which is going to tell you whether A and B are the same or if one is greater than the other. So let's put this one together again. Try running it, running the script through the browser, and it'll say enter the first integer and the second integer. Go ahead and enter both of them. The first one is A, the second one is B, and when you click on the submit button, it'll tell you what the result is. In this case, A is greater than B. Okay, so the one way to make decision in PHP is by using the if statement. Another way to make a decision in PHP is by using the switch statement. So here is how the switch statement works. You say switch, and you are passing a variable, and in this case it is expecting you to enter a number between 1 and 12 using the form again, and depending on the number that you entered, it will print the corresponding month name. And if you entered a number outside of this range, 1 through 12, it'll go into the default clause. This is like the else clause under the if statement. And it'll say that you entered an invalid month. You entered a number outside of the range of 1 through 12. Again, you may want to go back and put this, save this one as something.php and try running it through the browser. The coding style. Indentation. You may have noticed that certain statements were indented in the examples that I showed you earlier. Even though PHP does not care where you place your statements relative to each other, indenting the code helps making the code more readable. It turns out that when programming, you will be spending 90% of your time reading the code and only 10% of the time writing new code. So you should try to make your code readable, unless of course you are worried about your job security. Basically, you indent one level after each opening brace and move back one level after the closing brace. That will make your code very readable. Okay, so in this lesson we learned about making decisions using if and switch case, and also just a little bit about the forms and how to get input from the user. I will discuss that in more detail in one of my later tutorials. So what's next? We have the for loop and the do while loop coming up next. Please remember that tech@guru.com contains many tutorials on programming languages such as PHP, Java, and C#, and we continue adding more. Thank you for listening.